In the whole complex world of professional valuation, there's this one single question that holds the key to, well, everything. It's the very first thing an expert has to define, and it literally shapes every single calculation that follows. If you get this one concept right, the entire process just clicks into place. So, what is this foundational idea? Let's dig in. Okay, so picture this. You've been tasked with figuring out what something is worth. Could be a company, a building, a piece of art, whatever. Before you even think about opening a spreadsheet or crunching any numbers, what is the one question you absolutely, positively must answer first? Go on, take a second to think about it. And there it is. The answer is, what is its intended use? It's such a simple phrase, right? But that is the key that unlocks the entire valuation puzzle. It dictates the path you take, the tools you use, and, yeah, ultimately, the final number you land on. So what on earth does it actually mean? To get this right, we're not going to guess. We're going straight to the source. Let's look at the official definition from the International Valuation Standards, or IVS. These are the folks who set the global rules for this stuff. So here it is, the official definition: the use or uses for which a value is developed as described in the scope of work. I know, it sounds a little dry, maybe even too simple, but trust me, there is so much power packed into that one little sentence. So let's break it down piece by piece. The first part of that definition really gets right to the heart of it, the uses for which a value is developed. This is all about the purpose. It's the fundamental why behind the whole exercise. Why are we even doing this valuation in the first place? And that why can change everything. I mean, are you valuing a business because the owner is thinking about selling it? That's one thing. But what if it's for insurance purposes? Trying to figure out what it would cost to replace everything after a disaster. Totally different. Or, hey, maybe it's for a messy shareholder dispute. Or maybe it's just for the company's annual financial report. Each of these situations needs a completely different playbook. All right, now for that second piece of the definition, as described in the scope of work. So if the intended use is the why, then you can think of the scope of work as the how. It's the formal document, the actual blueprint, that lays out exactly how the valuation is going to get done to meet that specific goal. The whole process is a lot like building a house. First, you have to define the goal, right? That's your intended use. Are we building a small family home or a giant skyscraper? That decision changes everything that comes next. Then you create the plan, the architect's blueprints. That's your scope of work. And only after you have the goal and the plan can you finally start the actual work, the valuation itself. It just makes sense. You can't start building without blueprints, and you sure can't draw blueprints if you don't know what you're trying to build. Okay, before we move on, let's just clear up one little thing that sometimes trips people up. It's a quick note on terminology that the official standards actually address head-on. You might hear some people say intended use, and you'll hear other people say intended purpose. Well, the good news is, according to the International Valuation Standards, they mean the exact same thing. They're totally interchangeable. So don't let the different words confuse you. They're just two names for the very same idea. So, we've defined the term, we've cleared up the language, now we get to the most important part. Why does this one little concept matter so much? What are the real-world consequences of getting this right or getting it terribly wrong? Here's the bottom line. The intended use is basically the command center for the entire valuation. It dictates which methods the valuer is even allowed to use, what assumptions they can make, the kind of data they need to collect, and this is the big one, it has a massive influence on the final number. And this is where it all comes together. Just look at this table. Imagine we're valuing a single factory. If the intended use is a quick sale or liquidation, the valuer is focused on what a buyer would pay, like today. That's probably going to be a lower value. But what if we change the intended use to insurance replacement? Now the whole approach shifts to figuring out the cost to rebuild it from scratch, which is almost certainly a much higher value. And if we change it again to financial reporting, well, now we're using a whole different set of accounting rules for fair value, which will give us yet another number. It's the same asset, but three different purposes lead to three completely different and equally valid conclusions. Really, the best way to think about it is this. The intended use is the foundation that the entire valuation is built on. And if that foundation is wrong, if the purpose is misunderstood right from the very beginning, the whole structure is just unsound. It's going to collapse under any real scrutiny. Which brings us to one last really critical thought. If defining the intended use is the most important first step, what happens when it gets confused or miscommunicated? The answer is pretty simple. The valuation stops being a useful tool and just becomes a misleading number. Getting the why right isn't just the first step. It's the only thing that gives the final number its meaning.